NDTV. And you're watching NDTV 24/7.
Hello and welcome to Mumbai Live on Athlete Sting on Mumbai Live. From today, wholesale chemists have put a freeze on purchase of psychotropic drugs. These drugs include antidepressants, painkillers, sleeping tablets. They are sedatives like Cipla's Restil, Ranbaxy's Campos, anti-epilepsy drugs like Nicholas Piramal's Gardneril, and popular cough syrups like Corex and Fencidril. This means that if you go to your chemist to buy drugs which were easily available over the counter, you may now have to go empty-handed. The government has bought 140 of these prescription drugs under a special law of 1985. This law treats the medicines at par with narcotics and makes it really tough to buy and sell these drugs. So from now, every time a chemist wants to buy these drugs from a pharma company, both of these sides will have to fill up detailed forms. And joining us to discuss this in the studio, we have Mr. A.H. Khan from Sun Pharma. He'll give us the industry's take on this entire issue. We have with us Dr. Harish Shetty. He's a psychiatrist from Mumbai. And we also have with us Dr. Sanjeev, who joins us from New Delhi. And he is the General Secretary of the Indian Medical Association. Thank you all very much for joining us. If I could start with you, Dr. Shetty, you know, these, how do you view these developments?
I think it's a welcome development. All over the world, benzodiazepines are stringently controlled. And in India, we had a field day. I feel lakhs of patients who are on psychotropic drugs will be affected by this word banned. Every chemist is saying that it is banned. It is illegally boycotted by the chemist, and this should stop immediately. Many patients, heart patients who are on these drugs for sleep would have heart attacks, and a lot of psychiatric patients will actually relapse. And this measure was necessary because benzodiazepines have been abused for the last 15 years, and it has been reported by the media again and again. Right. We have approached the FDA in 1996 October asking them to use the NDPS Act. I think it's a systems change. Documentation is the rule of an accountable world.
All right, all right. Dr. Sanjeev, if you could tell us, what is your take on this? While Dr. Harish Shetty here says that, you know, this was long overdue, what do you think? Because there are patients whose life depend on these drugs.
Well, you see, the issues are two. We're talking of a particular group of drugs, the benzodiazepines coming under a particular act. And we're talking, I think the serious issue, now that's a very scientific medical issue, which I think what Dr. Shetty is saying is right. But the serious issue before us is that a whole lot of chemists have said that they would not be selling these drugs. And I think that's an issue which actually needs to be looked in, because whenever a chemist is given a chemist's license, I don't think he is given an option to decide which drugs he would keep and which he would not. And he can't decide to keep a particular drug because that involves a lot of documentation, or because it involves a tedious procedure of purchase and sale. Now, if that was the case, then you know, tomorrow patients would actually be running helter and skelter trying to get their drugs. So I think this particular aspect of the chemists trying to look at a whole lot of drugs and trying not to handle them or handle them in a particular way is a very serious issue. And I think one needs to look at that aspect also.
Okay, Mr. Khan, industry's perspective now. Psychotropic drugs, 30% of the Indian pharma market. It is a big chunk. And everyone is very hard hit. Over 800 brands will be affected. What does the industry want?
See, first of all, I would like to say that the perception that these drugs have been brought under the purview of NDPS now, this perception is wrong. The NDPS Act was enacted in 1985, and these drugs continue to to be classified as psychotropic substances. If you broadly look at the NDPS, there are several categories of drugs. There are narcotic drugs, there are narcotic drugs which are formulated in a small quantity, they are called manufactured drugs, and there is a class of drug which is controlled substance, and another drug is psychotropic.
Right.
So let us focus our discussion on psychotropic drug, which is currently the issue of discussion. There are about 111 drugs which are psychotropic substances. There are few additions off and on government keeps on making. These drugs, when the NDPS came into existence in 1985, immediately after NDPS, there were at that time only 4 or 5 companies who were making these benzodiazepines like diazepam and oxazepam and all. These companies immediately approached the government, because in the whole of the NDPS today the all hue and cry is being made by the enforcement agencies for not following the provisions of Rule 67.
Exactly. What is this Rule 6 that is causing the entire...
The Rule 67 says that anybody sells a quantity to another person, he has to take an acknowledgement in Form 6 having received that quantity into his possession. So this
you have to maintain forms, you have to keep patient's records for 2 years.
No, it is only says these Form 6, the acknowledgement of these medicines. Suppose you give me 100 box of alprazolam, you get a Form 6 signed from me and keep in your record. So if there is any inspection, I will be able to show that these are all the quantities I have sold to so and so.
Are you ready to do that? Is the pharma industry ready to do that?
Pharma industry immediately, I am telling you, immediately the 1986 the NDPS came, the pharma industry approached the government that this provision is very difficult, because how chemist will procure Form 6, how the administration will be difficult.
You are saying it's a tedious process.
It is a very tedious process, and the government has agreed to this. In 1986, in the month of May, they issued a directive to all their enforcement officers that till the legislation is amended, the insistence of provisions of Rule 67 should not be not be there. But the law has not been amended. That is why this problem is there.
All right, Dr. Shetty, how can a chemist keep hundreds of forms? Is that possible? Is that really feasible?
That's an exaggeration. I think it's a paradigm shift which the Chemist Association has to do in a liberalized world. The job of the Chemist Association is to educate the chemist, wherein we can also play a role and help them make this paradigm shift, make this jump in the interest of the country and in the interest of the patient. The drugs are not available even today.
Right.
It's not from tomorrow.
Right.
I think instead of raising the banner of a red flag, it is the social responsibility of the chemist and the Chemist Association which is in question as of now.
Right. Social responsibility, says Dr. Shetty. Dr. Sanjeev Malik, how do we break this impasse? What do we do?
Well, I think we need to be very practical. It's a fact that there is a lot of paperwork involved if you were to actually follow the rules. But it's also a fact that just forget these drugs, just forget psychotropics. Basic drugs which are supposed to be sold on prescription, strictly on prescription, how many of us actually go and buy it on prescription? How many chemists would not sell you an anti-cancer drug across the counter in spite of the fact that there is a strict rule that these are Schedule H drugs, these are prescription drugs. So I think the chemist cannot just get away by saying that there is a lot of paperwork, because where paperwork is not involved, also they are not acting. At the same point of time, I think we need to make the law, make the rules a little more flexible, because you obviously every time you're selling a particular psychotropic drug, you can't have a lot of paperwork to be done. But yes, you definitely need to keep records. It's a global phenomena. India is no exception. All over the world, whenever you're selling narcotic drugs, there's a particular procedure to be followed. So I think chemists must realize their social responsibility, which I think chemists and the chemist associations are failing to do so at this point of time. The laws need to be more proactively looked at in the present scenario. We shouldn't be just looking at laws which were made 50 years back. And at the same point of time, the drug policies and the scheduling of drugs should again be a very dynamic, proactive process to be reviewed very actively. Not that we just do it once and then forget about it for 20 years.
All right, Dr. Malik. Thank you, Dr. Malik from Delhi, for joining us. Mr. Khan, last word from you. Do you fear that this will lead to a parallel market if you're not able to break this deadlock? Do you think that, the drugs will be available on the sly? Quick response from you.
No, I don't think, but the issue is that the patients are suffering and the companies are not able to sell these drugs because of the people are refusing to buy and they are taking. I think the quick solution to this will be that the law should be amended. Drug Controller India also said that this should be amended, and the Rule 65 totally decentralizes the administration, stocking, sales under Drugs and Cosmetics Act.
Okay.
And there are stringent rules under Drugs and Cosmetics. If you find that one drug is abused, put it under Schedule X.
Okay.
There is a provision. So when you can control this by this way. Why you are harassing the general public by and the narcotic people? I think once they come and they interrogate, everybody they consider that he is a drug peddler. There will have to be a clear-cut demarcation between a genuine pharmaceutical manufacturer and a drug peddler.
All right. Okay. Thank you both very much for joining us, Dr. Hari Shetty and Mr. Khan. Thank you very much for joining us. We're going to move on now. It's a big decision we have time for tonight on Mumbai Live, but the news continues on NDTV 24/7.